Platelet plug formation, also known as primary hemostasis, is the first of two processes required to form a blood clot. In this mnemonic video, we'll give you an easy way to remember each of these steps involved in forming a platelet plug. Let's get started. First, shift your gaze to the stack of plates coming together. Yup, looks like we're tying up these plates so our son can take them as he moves out to start his first job after college. By the way, these plates coming together should serve as your memory anchor for platelet plug formation. You know, since platelet plug formation is just a process that clumps platelets together. This clump of platelets can then plug holes in blood vessels, which is the first of two processes needed in order to form a blood clot. For this reason, platelet plug formation is also known as primary hemostasis. The primary bit refers to it coming first before the coagulation cascade, and hemostasis literally translates to stopping a bleed. Now that we've discussed why platelet plug formation happens, let's talk about the specific steps that kick off this process, shall we? In addition to getting our newly graduated son these plates, we also got him a fresh new car, but it appears he's bumped into and cut himself on the car. Coincidentally, the injury here should remind you of vessel injury, the first step in platelet plug formation. Next, let's pan over to the college graduation cap our son is wearing. This college cap should help you remember collagen. College for collagen, right? Vessel injury exposes the collagen that makes up the subendothelial tissue and basement membrane in blood vessels. Exposure of this collagen is what actually tells the substances inside your vessel that an injury has happened. We'll discuss more of the specifics in our following symbols. Now, take a look at my son's hand where he seems to be squeezing a red bottle of ketchup. Of course, you'd need ketchup for the food at a college graduation party, right? Squeezing this red cylindrical bottle should remind you of vasoconstriction, or constriction of red blood vessels, since both describe squeezing down on red tube-like structures, right? After tissue injury, the vessel around the injured site undergoes a brief period of vasoconstriction in which it clamps down to reduce blood flow. The slowing of flow serves a few purposes. One, it reduces potential blood loss through the injury in the vessel, and two, it allows substances circulating inside the blood vessel to bind to the vessel walls. More on this in a moment. Despite injuring himself on the hood of this car, our son here still hasn't let go of his car keys. And wait, that's not any car brand, no. It's the famous VWF brand. You know, VW's counterpart in the Pixarized universe. So the VWF keys being held tightly by our college student should remind you that VWF binds tightly to the collagen exposed by vessel injury. Let me explain. VWF stands for von Willebrand factor, a substance released from the walls of blood vessels and activated platelets that promotes the formation of platelet plugs. This VWF binds to and sticks to any exposed collagen and then serves as a signal itself for the rest of platelet plug formation to happen. In that vein, take a look at the plate stuck to the top of the VWF car. Yep, we must have taped the plate on top of the car to remind our son to take the plates with him. This plate attached to the VWF car also serves to represent platelet adhesion to VWF. You see, the next step in platelet plug formation is the binding of a circulating platelet to VWF, which, as you know, is already bound to exposed collagen at the site of tissue injury. Therefore, you can think of this as the first platelet getting recruited to the site of injury. Next, shift your gaze inside the car at the GPS on display, denoting that we are 1 block away from our destination. Since every new car comes with a fresh GPS, this is our symbol for GP1B. Let me explain. The GPS here should remind you of the GP, and the 1 block should remind you of 1B. Putting this together, you get GP1B. Make sense? GP1B, or glycoprotein 1B, is a receptor expressed on the surface of platelets, and it is this GP1B receptor that specifically binds to VWF. So the platelet adhesion to VWF happens by way of a GP1B receptor. Got that? Afterwards, let's pan over to the receipt for the new GPS. This receipt should help you remember ristocetin. You know, it's the ristocetin receipt. Ristocetin is a laboratory compound that works to forcibly link together GP1B and VWF. In other words, ristocetin is a potent stimulator of platelet binding to GP1B and platelet aggregation as a whole. Clinically, ristocetin is used as a diagnostic test to assess for deficiencies in GP1B or VWF. You should check out our dedicated scenes on Bernard-Soulier and von Willebrand disease to learn more, but I thought I'd just contextualize what ristocetin does in the context of platelet plug formation. Next, shift your gaze to the adapter falling out of the open car trunk. Must be the adapter for charging the GPS, which was knocked out by our son bumping into the car. This released adapter should help you remember the release of ADP. You know, since ADP stands for adapter, right? And this adapter is getting released, just like how platelets bound to VWF release ADP. You see, when platelets bind to VWF via GP1B, they become activated and release ADP. ADP here actually stands for adenosine diphosphate, and this ADP serves as a signaling molecule to activate other platelets. Afterwards, let's pan over to what else was released from the car trunk. It looks like a pair of Texas shoes. This released Texas shoe should help you remember the release of TXA2. Get it? Texas for TXA and shoe as our rhyme for the number 2. What's more, shoes usually come in a pair of 2. TXA2 stands for thromboxane A2, another compound released by platelets activated by binding to VWF. TXA2 is another stimulator of platelet activation, which we'll get back to in a moment. As it turns out, a cup of calcium ice cream also fell out of the open car trunk, since no college graduation party is complete without ice cream, right? This released calcium ice cream should help you remember that platelets bound to VWF also release calcium ions. As you'll see in our later videos on the coagulation pathways, calcium ions are important for secondary hemostasis needed to form a stable blood clot. The calcium may also play a role in improving the stability of the platelet plug. After seeing our son's injury, it looks like Dad has found out and is running over despite carrying a ton of plates in his hands. This dad bringing more plates should help you remember that in the next step of this process, neighboring platelets are recruited and activated. To understand how this happens, shift your gaze to how Dad seems to be tripping over the power strip where the adapters are supposed to be plugged in. The outlets here represent ADP receptors, since they serve as binding sites for ADP, which was represented by an adapter, right? This should help you remember that ADP receptor binding mediates the activation of nearby platelets. Recall that ADP and TXA2 are both platelet-activating compounds released by the first platelet bound to VWF. After detecting these compounds, other circulating platelets flock to the site and also become activated by ADP receptor binding. These activated platelets then release more ADP and result in a chain reaction that basically brings a ton of activated platelets to the injury site. Still with me? Wait, what's in Dad's hands there? Are those 23andMe reports? I guess before he bought a new car for our son, he wanted to confirm that the kid was indeed his biological child. No time like after college graduation to run a genetic test. Anyways, the 23andMe here should remind you of GP2B3A. 23andMe for 2B3A, right? You see, platelets activated by ADP receptor binding also begin to express increased amounts of GP2B3A. This is glycoprotein on the surface of platelets that plays key roles in linking platelets together. So, to understand how this happens, pan over to the foreground where I'm using these fibers to tie together these plates. This picture should remind you of fibrinogen linking together platelets to form a complete platelet plug. You know, since fiber reminds me of fibrinogen and platelets stand for plates. You probably noticed that one of the 23andMe reports was tied up with the plates using the fiber. This 23andMe report tied in fiber should help you remember fibers link platelets together via their GP2B3A receptors. As we already discussed, activated platelets express GP2B3A receptors on their surfaces. Circulating fibrinogen serves as a bridge connecting these receptors on neighboring platelets, which effectively brings the platelets together into a platelet plug. This clump of platelets is attached to the site of vessel injury, and its mass basically plugs the hole and prevents the loss of blood. This platelet plug is later stabilized by the coagulation cascade to form a stable blood clot. Looking at platelet plug formation at a higher level, this process also has a few key regulators and inhibitors. We've already mentioned previously how vasoconstriction, TXA2, and platelet activation are all factors that contribute to the formation of a platelet plug. Therefore, it should be obvious that all of these factors promote the formation of a bigger platelet plug. Some resources like First Aid tell you to memorize these factoids, but I think it's far better to just reason through the pathway. Afterwards, take a look at how I've spilled some cold nitrous oxide gas on the floor here. We must have been using this to keep the ice cream cold. Anyways, this nitrous oxide gas here that is stopping me from tying together these plates should remind you that platelet plug formation is inhibited by nitrous oxide. You see, nitrous oxide, or NO for short, is a potent vasodilator of blood vessels in the body. This blocks platelet plug formation since, as we previously discussed, vasoconstriction is needed to slow blood flow to allow VWF and platelets time to bind. NO causes vasodilation, which increases blood flow and flow rate, inhibiting the binding of VWF and platelets to the site of injury. This ultimately inhibits platelet plug formation. Now, let's check out the penguin shoes that I've spilled the nitrous oxide gas on. Yep, my feet are freezing in there now. The spill on the penguin shoes, also blocking the tying together of platelets, should help you remember that PGI2 is another inhibitor of platelet plug formation. You know, PGI stands for penguin and shoe for the number 2. PGI2 actually stands for prostaglandin I2, an inflammatory molecule that works to promote blood flow by inducing vasodilation and blocking platelet plug formation. Just remember that PGI2 is another inhibitor of platelet plug formation. Alright, that's all for this video on platelet plug formation. Let's recap. Platelet plug formation, also known as primary hemostasis, is the first of 2 processes required to form a blood clot. This process occurs over many different steps. Platelet plug formation begins with injury to a vessel wall, which exposes collagen to circulating blood. Transient vasoconstriction also occurs at the site of injury, which enables von Willebrand factor, or VWF, to bind to the exposed collagen. Next, a circulating platelet adheres to the VWF via its GP1B receptor. The interaction between VWF and GP1B receptors on platelets can be stimulated in laboratory settings by the addition of ristocetin. After adhering to VWF, the platelet releases ADP, TXA2, and calcium ions, all of which play important roles in later hemostasis. Notably, this release attracts other circulating platelets to the injury site where they become activated upon ADP receptor binding. After activation, these platelets express GP2B3A on their surfaces. Circulating fibrinogen then acts as a bridge to link platelets together via their GP2B3A receptors. The end result is aggregation into a platelet plug, which serves to block blood flow to the injury site and prevent blood loss. This platelet plug is later stabilized by the coagulation cascade to form a stable blood clot. As you might expect, the formation of a platelet plug is stimulated by vasoconstriction, TXA2, and activated platelets, since all of these factors play a role in this formation pathway. In contrast, nitrous oxide and PGI2 both work as important inhibitors of platelet plug formation. And now we're actually done with platelet plug formation. See you next time!